as we take a look at this vision. And really the first part is going to be kind of quick, and then because there's so much in the last part, I gotta slow it down. Oops. So first of all, there's the revelation of the dream. So the dream is of Nebuchadnezzar, and it was this huge statue. And the Bible tells us in verses 31 through 33, man, there were 5 different parts. So he says, there's the head of gold, right? Then he goes on to talk about that the chest and the arms are silver. Then the belly and the top part of the legs, the thighs, are bronze, okay? And then the legs, so that would be the knees down, are iron. And then the feet are both a mixture of iron and clay. Now, I mean, if you just think about this for a moment, it's like 5 different sections of this huge statue of different material. Okay? And the 4 metals that are mentioned, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, are representative of distinct empires that would rule the world prior to Christ's coming. Okay? So there's the revelation of this dream. What is this dream about? Well, then Daniel goes on to interpret the dream. See, a lot of times in prophecy, they'll talk about the dream, and then there's going to be the interpretation of the dream. See, the dream is all about the kingdoms. Now, the word kingdom appears 9 times in these verses. And it really means that, it's where the king would rule from. It represents the right of the king to rule. And Daniel says in verse 21, back up in verse 21, he changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. See, one thing that if we think about history, we think about like these rulers, right? They thought they were God, right? I mean, kings in Europe in the Middle Ages, they thought they were God. Even the Kim Jong-un, that whole family in North Korea, they basically are worshipped like gods. I mean, that's how that's set up. Okay? But who is the one who controls all of that? It's God. Yeah. It's God who controls all that. So God is the one who establishes kings and kingdoms. For all the posturing that happens in elections, okay? Gotta love election time. It's getting close where we'll have an hour of commercials and then a 5-minute television show because we got to sit through all the political ads. All right? It is God who makes the decision. So I want to kind of go through what each of the parts mean, the first 4, rather quickly because it's the last part. It's the feet and the clay. That is where we're focusing in on. Okay? So the first kingdom is the kingdom of gold. That is the Babylonian Empire. That is where Nebuchadnezzar is ruling. It is his kingdom. It lasts for about 70 years. Babylon was at that time the epitome of wealth. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were one of the ancient wonders of the world. I mean, it was this magnificent. It was actually known as the Golden Kingdom. But that's where the head starts. It starts with the Babylonians. The kingdom of silver is what is called the Medo-Persia Empire, or the Persian Empire, which Babylon today is in like southern Iraq. The Persian Empire is modern day Iran. I mean, for years, Iran was actually known as Persia. Right? So the kingdom, verse 39 tells us, that comes after Nebuchadnezzar is known as an inferior kingdom. That's why it's represented by silver. Silver is, when you talk about jewelry, you have your gold jewelry and then you have your silver jewelry. It's kind of like, it's nice jewelry, but it's not as good as my gold jewelry. And I love this story. I love this story from Daniel. So Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar, was having this party. And Belshazzar and all these people, they're sitting around and they're mocking God. Chapter 5 of the book of Daniel. They're mocking God. They're mocking Israel. They're making fun of it. And all of a sudden, and this is where it'll freak you out, this hand appears and writes on the wall, "Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians." Now, just imagine for a moment, we're sitting here and we're talking, we're mocking God. And all of a sudden, this hand appears on this brick wall over here and writes, "Your kingdom has been divided." I mean, it's just this hand appearing on the wall. I mean, it's like this horror movie, right? And if they're like, "A hand's writing on the wall. Where's that hand coming from?" I mean, it's like that. I love that story because it's like, that's what you get for mocking God, is a hand, a floating hand, riding on the wall in your banquet hall. And then it's not but moments later, guess who shows up to conquer them? The Medes and the Persians. So if you take nothing else from that story, is if you mock God, you're going to lose it all. Okay? But even though they were, that's why the arms, the two, the Medes and the Persians, both come together to take over the Babylonian Empire. The bronze is the Greeks. That's the belly and the top of the legs. Verse 39 says that this kingdom is going to rule over all the earth. The king of Persia, and if you want to, you can read about this, go to the book of Esther, because the king in the book of Esther was so afraid of the Greeks. He was terrified of the Greeks. Well, all this comes along is a guy named Philip of Macedonia. He had a famous son that we probably all learned about in history, Alexander the Great. And Alexander extended the Greek Empire over the known world at the time. Macedonia, which is northern Greece, Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, down into Iraq and and Iran, through that region, all over. I mean, when you name your kid Alexander the Great, you really expect things from them. I mean, name him Alexander the So-So, it's kind of a little bit of less of a, expectation there, right? But, Alexander the Great ruled over all of that. And that bronze, it was said that at one point, Alexander the Great actually wept because there were no more worlds for him to conquer. And it was upon Alexander the Great's death that the fourth kingdom, the kingdom of iron, which is Rome, came into power. Verse 40 tells us there is nothing as strong as iron. What do they make skyscrapers out of? Right? Iron. Right? Just think of all the things that iron is used for and how strong it is. They conquered, after Alexander the Great's death, they conquered what was the Greek Empire and became the most dominant and influential kingdom in the modern history. Rome assumed power throughout Europe and the Mediterranean some 50 years before Christ was even born. And they ruled that through the expansion of the church all the way up to basically England. They ruled everything. And when the phrase is all roads led to Rome, that was pretty much it. There was no empire, or has there ever been an empire like the Roman Empire? The Roman Empire spread farther than any previous kingdom, and it crushed all opponents with a heel of iron. And so Daniel is explaining this to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head. You're going to be taken over by the arms and the chest. It's going to be taken over by the belly and the thighs. Who's going to be taken over by the legs? Well, that leaves one more kingdom. And this is where this is for us. It's the kingdom of iron and clay. And we call that the revived Roman Empire. I tried to, as I got more into this, I was like, there's a lot of things I learned as I was studying this. And it's like, do I just tell you? So I just left it in your notes because in case you're ever on Jeopardy, anything like that, you may need this information later on, okay? Random conversations with people, you want to throw a fact out there to impress them, whatever it might be, you might need it. But this last empire is the empire that is going to be when Christ returns. This is the revived empire that has yet to completely come into existence. I didn't say hasn't come into existence. I said hasn't completely come into existence. See, Daniel tells us that this is the most important one because this one was further out in the future. He says, on the feet are 10 toes. The 10 toes represent 10 groups that are going to come together. And these didn't exist during the Roman Empire. They had yet to exist yet. Verse 44 says, at the time of the revived Roman Empire, God, the God of heaven, will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And it talks about that God will break it into pieces and consume, because he will rule forever. That's the millennial reign of Christ. As we get closer to the rapture, it is this revived Roman Empire that will gain in strength leading up to the rapture, and will come through the rapture and then ultimately be destroyed at the end of the tribulation. See, it's interesting that unlike the Babylonians, the Medes and the Persians, and the Greeks, the Roman Empire wasn't destroyed. It just kind of, over time, kind of just fell apart. And in that essence, it's the same way. It has to come back over time. And this is where, as you take a look at history, and if you take history and you have a Christ-centered view of history, you begin to go, that makes sense. I see how that plays into it. This is not taking history and trying to shove it into Scripture. This is God preparing us for what's going to happen. As I said, this has already started. It's not yet complete. Okay? So, in 1946, Winston Churchill said, we need something like the United States, but for Europe, where it's easier for us to kind of do things and to work together. So in 1948, in Belgium, was the beginning of what was called the European Economic Community. Almost 10 years later, 6 countries would come together: Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, and West Germany. And they would be called the Common Market. And what it did is it basically said, hey, we're going to work together to make it easier to trade goods and, travel between countries and all sorts of things. Then in 1973, England, Ireland, and Denmark. And then in 1981, Greece joined, bringing the total to 10. 10 toes. Okay. At that point, some prophecy students thought, okay, that's it. Those are the 10 nations that are going to come together. The rapture is like next week. Okay? It didn't happen, but it's what they thought. In 1986, Spain and Portugal were added, and it really adopted the idea of a unified political Europe. In 1992, Basically, the borders between these countries were removed. If you lived in Europe, you could travel between these countries just as easy as you can drive between North and South Carolina. In 1995, Austria, Finland, Sweden also joined. And in 2002, we have what's now called the euro. One currency for all those nations. I remember I had not been saved long, just freshly in ministry, and you begin to hear people going, that's the one world government right there. We're close. Not quite there yet. Okay? And by 2013, an additional 13 nations joined the European Union, making the combined population larger than that of the United States. There is now an economic and political union pretty much the same geographic size of the former Roman Empire, only larger and stronger. And this power is what is needed to be in place before God's kingdom could appear and then destroy it, making way for the millennial reign of Christ. The feet of the statue are iron and clay. The iron represents strength, but the clay represents the will of the people involved. It is a warning of the volatility of the mixing powers with people from so many different cultural groups and backgrounds as we see today. It's amazing some 2,500 years ago that God could give a young Hebrew boy named Daniel a vision of what's going to happen. And the only way that can happen is because God is the God of today, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and forever. So what is the ultimate implication here? Well, I think there's several things. So one, what does this mean for us? Well, there's a consolidation of world powers here. In the days of the original Roman Empire, there was one ruler, Rome, that has not been true since the Roman Empire fell. I mean, Hitler tried, Stalin tried, others have tried. But when Christ returns, in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel says, as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue the 3 kings. When you think about that, you wonder how one person could ever rule the world. It's just, I mean, how could one person rule the world? But the European Union come together in this lifetime, and we've seen this take place really in the last 60 years or more. It's pretty possible. Think about the existence today. Technology, the ease of communication, the means of commerce and travel. One individual's influence can be immediately transferred around the world. I meant to try to watch. I did not get a chance to. But evidently on Easter Sunday, Franklin Graham did a message from Kyiv in the Ukraine on Easter Sunday. I didn't get a chance to watch it. Really wish I had. But, I mean, I could go to probably YouTube right now and watch it. I mean, it's going to be on there. But today, if something happened on the other side of the globe right now, within a minute our phones would be dinging going, you know, this is happening in some place we don't know because of technology. You know, to be able to get places and do things and see things. And to see the nations who used to be enemies in Europe. I mean, following World War II, that all these countries came together for the unified purpose is astounding. Suggests that the possibility of one person rising out of that as a strong possibility. And think about this. And I think I have them in your notes. Okay, just think about this for a moment. Think about how conditions right now in the world are, right? War. Oil and gas prices. Food shortages because of supplies. Natural disasters. When people get desperate enough, right? They'll give their allegiance to somebody who could easily become the ruler of the majority of the world's populations in Europe. See, and remember, we talked about Russia, Ezekiel's prophecy some time ago. But if this, now, I mean, again, I'm not making a prophecy claim, so don't go out of here saying the pastor said that in 2 weeks, you know, that this is going to happen. But if that conflict goes on long enough and it gets harsh enough, people looking to one person to try to solve the problem is going to become a real factor, as we have seen in times before. So there's also the coming of the one world leader. Daniel's dream, he spoke with pompous words against the Most High in Daniel chapter 7. He's talking about this one person that's going to come out. That's the Antichrist. Antichrist, opposite of Christ. He will rise up. These nations that have come together, he's going to rise up as one leader. And in order for him to come on the world scene, these states have had to come together. That's what I say. The states have come together. All we're waiting for is that one thing that's going to drive everybody to go, we need one person to lead us. Decades ago, man, that didn't exist. But it is in place today. And some people, and I kind of believe, I think that person is already alive today. The person who's representing of the Antichrist is already alive. The person listed there, Paul Henry Spake, was the first president of the UN. And he made this statement: we don't need another committee. We have too many already. What we need is a man of sufficient stature to hold the allegiance of all the people, to lift us out of the economic morass into which we are sinking. Send us such a man, and be he God or devil, we will receive him. It's a pretty powerful statement. We don't care if it's God, or we don't care if it's the devil. All we want is somebody to get us all together. I kind of read that and was reading from David Jeremiah, I was like, man, that's so what people are looking for today. Mm-hmm. And while we may not be able to envision that in the future, the cause of hundreds of millions of people to submit to the devil, the Bible has said it's already going to happen. I mean, just think about that. And because of the tribulation, it's going to create that much more. So again, all these things are going to happen together. We talked about Israel. These European nations are already working together. That coalition is there. It's that one event. What is that event going to be? The rapture. The rapture, wars, rumors of war, oil economics, food shortages, supplies, all these things leading together. And it's like the light bulb ought to go. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh.
Could happen today.
Could happen today. I mean, just and the Europe is primed for that. I mean, that's why Russia, again, go back to the study of Russia from Ezekiel, Israel, Europe. And that one world leader is going to come into power. Daniel chapter 9 is where the treaty with Israel begins to be talked about. And then it goes into Revelation. This person, this Antichrist, establishes this treaty with Israel. Now, the treaty is supposed to be for 7 years. That doesn't sound good, and it's definitely not going to turn out that way. And again, I've said this before. The Jews and the Arabs have never gotten along together. As far as I can remember, every president has tried to make peace between Israel and the Arabs. So it's not out of question that this person is going to be able to bring that together. Israel has been willing at times to make concessions. But a lot of times it's the only concession that the other side wants is for basically Israel to go away. And I mean, I don't know about you, but that's not really a good deal. Okay? But the treaty will not last, because what Daniel tells us is halfway through 3.5 years, the treaty is broken. And in a couple weeks, when we look at how all this begins to unfold in the tribulation, it starts really slow. And all of a sudden, the midpoint, the 3.5 years, it's like all these things, man, they speed up like one right after the other. Where there's not even a time to go, okay, I'm going to catch my breath from this bad thing before the next bad thing has already happened, and 5 down the road are standing right behind waiting for it to come out. Romans chapter 13. Do this, knowing the time is already the hour for you to awaken from sleep. For now salvation is nearer to us than we believed. Man, we are closer than we've ever been before. So I said a moment ago, they've come together. It's not complete, but we are like right there. Mm-hmm. Like the ball is like at the edge of the cliff, and it's teetering. Saw this golf tournament one time, and I don't remember who it was, but they hit the shot, and the ball rolled right up to the edge of the cup, and it sat there like halfway on and halfway off. And the guy stood there for forever, waiting, because you could kind of see the ball moving. And then finally it fell in. But that's what we're like right now. In the last 100 years, Israel, is a nation. There is in place a revived community of nations resembling the old Roman Empire. And the Arab nations control most of the world's petroleum, which equals influence and power in the world economy. It's kind of scary. And I said there at the end, I believe it is the season of the Lord's return. I mean, I'm not one of these. I'm not going to be one of these guys like, okay, everybody, go get your doomsday box and get your bunker ready and sound the air raid sirens. Which probably most of us remember the air raid drills, growing up, in case I still don't understand how hiding under a desk is going to save you from a nuclear fallout, but evidently it was supposed to help protect you. It's supposed to make you feel better about yourself.
There was a documentary last night on TV, if you saw it, about the food supplies being destroyed.
Yeah.
He said in the past 5 to 6 years, many of the United States food supplies, factories, farms, airplane crashes, into the buildings that have gone on fire. There's been explosions. A huge number have been destroyed.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
You say the food supplies. Yeah.
Well, they've already come up with their executives in California now that have the little microchip in their forehead already.
Yeah.
So
They've also heard on the news today that the meat processing plants in the last several years, several of them have been targeted, like 20.
Yeah.
And they're basically like the only ones that process meat. So,
And so, you think, gas, food, everything, the cost of goods. So, and again, I'm not saying let's all go out of here and we're going to, stock up, get our bunkers together, kind of thing. Because as believers,
we're going to be gone.
we don't have to worry about that. If you believe a pre-tribulation view of the rapture, unless you want to go through it, then we'll just be watching from heaven.
Is there somewhere in the Bible that says the Antichrist comes from the north?
Well,
I've heard that.
Yeah, and further in Revelation, talk about where the Antichrist comes from. In the 7 churches talked about where the Pergamos is where the devil lives, and so some people say, well, he's that's why. And I think the person who's going to be that epitome is already embodied in our society today.
I think so too.
Now, of course, we could go through the jokes of people going, well, that person's the Antichrist.
Yeah.
It's been said about every political leader,
Yeah.
from the last 100 years. We won't get into a political discussion.
But you could feel something is different.
Yeah.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
You